Hi, you're with Julian on the Brown Note, and we're all having a really good laugh at Liz Truss, the shortest British Prime Minister in history, famously outlived by a head of lettuce in one of the purest examples of British comedy from the Daily Star, who put a head of lettuce on a live stream and said that she wouldn't last. And Liz Truss has proven to be in an era of right-wing populists that are some of the dumbest people that have ever risen to the top, disproving the Western world's meritocracy existing at all. She did some amazing things, which was promote economic neoliberalism when even the people that promote economic liberalism in private don't say it out loud. Everyone knows it failed 40 years ago and has destroyed the Western world. And she just doubled down. But obviously a very inept character. But if you want to blame people, the thing that is the most galling from me as someone that is from the UK originally is the fact that a few years back we had the greatest political leader of my lifetime, the most honourable human being of my lifetime, with the best policies, the most moral man, the most ethical man, and a raft of socialist democratic policies that were the antithesis of the unending nightmare that the Tory party is, called Jeremy Corbyn. Now, if you want to blame anyone for Liz Truss, start with the Guardian newspaper. So Jeremy Corbyn rose like Bernie Sanders on a wave of populism. And it's a different kind of populism because it wasn't right-wing populism, anti-immigrant, anti-woke, anti-gay, anti-everything. It was about, social justice, funding people at the lower end of the ladder so they have a better life, making people at the top pay more than they're paying so that everyone has a better life and that the economy is better because it's not all being siphoned off. And a raft of amazingly humanistic policies, as well as being a great man. But he pissed off the Guardian. So this left-leaning newspaper went after him for 3 years straight. They and the BBC forced him to stand for his own re-election in his own party, which he won by a landslide. And then he faced the Brexit election, which no one would have won. Everyone on the Brexit bandwagon was going to vote for Boris Johnson. There was no winning that election, and then they all piled in on Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn's looking like a really good bet right now. The Guardian newspaper doubled down on their attacks on Jeremy Corbyn because they were beholden to Tony Blair's offspring, the Blairites, who have pointedly never won an election since Tony Blair. Tony Blair won an election that John Smith, who died whilst being the Labour leader in the UK in the 1990s, would have walked to victory on. Labour would have won those two elections with anyone in charge. Then Tony Blair lost 60 seats in the third election that he stood for. He still won. Since then, no Blairite has ever won an election. But if you listen to the media, they will tell you only Tony Blair Labour can ever get elected. And they're going to do the same thing in Australia with Anthony Albanese. Bill Shorten had a raft of really good policies. And they will tell you, Anthony Albanese is so much closer to the centre. He's so much more like the neoliberal politicians. I hope he isn't. I hope he is the cleverest politician to get elected in Australian history. And he's hiding his socialism under this bushel. But they have gone on about how Tony Blair is the only possible way that Labour can get elected, so we never get a Labour government. So the Guardian newspaper knew full well that we would end up with Boris Johnson as the Prime Minister of England, something that makes ScoMo and Donald Trump pretty much equal, like people that should never have been allowed anywhere near office. They, like in America where they were prepared to risk Donald Trump being elected by going after Bernie Sanders and installing Hillary Clinton, probably the worst Democratic nominee in modern history, an unelectable force. one of the most uncharismatic, unnatural people that have ever stood. And we had a chance of Bernie Sanders in America. Bernie Sanders is still mega popular. We had the same in England. We had the same in the UK with Jeremy Corbyn. So they went after him, calling him an anti-Semite, as though the day he took over the leadership, the anti-Semitism they accused Labour of started that day. And then he left, and they haven't mentioned it again, because it obviously stopped that day. No one accused Jeremy Corbyn of being an anti-Semite per se. They said that he presided over a Labour Party that had a problem. Jeremy Corbyn has the best track record of any politician in the United Kingdom on anti-racism. You can go back decades, as you can with Bernie Sanders, and he's on the front line campaigning against racism. And on the other side, you've got a Tory party that is up to its neck in racism, that led the amazingly racist Brexit campaign, that is incredibly anti-Islam. And they got a free pass from people like The Guardian, and Jeremy Corbyn occupied all of their attacks. They gave us this shit show that we've got in the UK. And make no bones about it, for me, the most likely person it should be someone like Jeremy Hunt that takes over, who's the Chancellor. I can see it being Boris Johnson. And the scary thing is, the people that voted Boris Johnson in the first place, they already knew he was an axe-murdering maniac. They aren't going to be dissuaded by anything he did in power. I know he's not an axe-murdering maniac, but he had so much baggage then, and they still said, no, I'm voting for Boris Johnson. They'll vote for him again. And we've got Keir Starmer, this Blairite, in power in Labour, as the Labour leader in the UK. And under current conditions, he waltzes to an election victory. What will they do? They'll say it was all about him and his Blairite policies. No, it wasn't. It was the fact that the Tory party collapsed so spectacularly. But I've often gone on about how bad the news media is in Australia and how one-sided they are. Even now, the news media in Australia gives far more coverage to the Liberal Party in opposition than they do to Labour, who are in power. But I think the UK's is even worse. They were celebrating Liz Truss as being awesome. And the reason that they all celebrated Liz Truss for being awesome is that she was pro-Boris Johnson. That is it. She was a Boris Johnson loyalist that refused to criticise him. So when you look at this landscape of media in the UK, I expect the Daily Mail, the Sun, all of these the Daily Express, all these right-wing newspapers, I expect to support the Tories no matter what. They are the enemy of the people of the UK, and they have created this entire class of people who are working or middle-class people that support the Tories no matter what, to stick it to the left, going really well, but they don't care. They just don't care. They'll just keep doing it. As I've said many times, the only way to beat people like Trump or ScoMo or Boris Johnson is to outnumber them. You're never going to win these people over. But when you've got that side of the news media, and then you've got the BBC and the Guardian newspaper going a hell for leather against Jeremy Corbyn a few years back and destroying him. Even when they failed the first time, they kept going. And even though he lost an unwinnable election, they tried to paint it all as his policies. It was never about anything other than Brexit in that election. And God, how much better would the UK be with Jeremy Corbyn as their leader now? They might even review Brexit. His policy was to nationalise the power companies. And they're now going through a winter of discontent where they can't afford power because of the hiking of private enterprise. And whoever follows Liz Truss, I mean, the Tories in the UK are the embodiment of something that happened in Australia with Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison, which is people seeking office through ego. They have no point in being there other than their own ego. And whoever comes in for the Tories, it doesn't matter. The fact that the public have voted these animals in over and over, no matter what they do, no matter how bad the quality of life gets, But I have to say, right now, the public, half the public are just stupid. They just really are. They look at someone like Jeremy Corbyn as their enemy, and they look at some posh, Eton educated twat who laughs at them behind their back as their friend.